He's going to jail. Black people, stop sticking up for that young man. He murdered somebody. He's going to jail.
You're sitting in the courtroom expecting another quiet day of legal back and forth, but what you get is an eruption. It starts small, whispers, side glances, quiet tension between the front rows. On one side sits the Metcalf family, reserved but visibly rattled. On the other, Karmelo Anthony's relatives, tight-lipped, protective, but defensive. Then the judge orders a short recess. The moment the gavel hits the wood, everything breaks. A voice from the back snaps, "You raised a killer." Seconds later, a response fires back, louder, sharper. "Watch your mouth." Suddenly, it's not just words. People stand. Security steps forward. Tears, shouting, 2 family members restrained. Courtroom guards move in fast, separating rows as gasps echo off the walls. One of Karmelo's cousins tries to push past the bench. A woman from the Metcalf side breaks down in tears, screaming, "He showed no remorse, and now you defend him like nothing happened." Phones are raised. Clips hit social media before the judge even makes it back to the bench. And just like that, the story isn't about legal arguments anymore. It's about grief finally exploding into rage. You feel it in the air. This trial was never just about guilt. It was about 2 families trying to survive a story they didn't write. And now you start to wonder, how much longer can they sit in the same room? Will the trial survive the emotion? And what happens if the next outburst isn't just words? Because this courtroom isn't a place of order today. It's a pressure cooker, and the lid just blew off. The courtroom is quiet again, but it's not peace, it's pressure. The kind of silence that comes after a bomb goes off. The outburst was brief, but its impact lingers in every glare, every tightened jaw, every sideways glance between the families now separated by a wall of court officers and cold stares. You watch as the judge returns, clearly rattled, his tone sharp and clipped. He doesn't ask what happened. He knows. Everyone does. A bailiff stands near the aisle now, arms crossed, radio on. Another one has moved closer to Karmelo's section, eyes locked on the family. What was once just a courtroom is now a standoff zone. Even Karmelo seems different. Still quiet, still unreadable, but now watching everyone. No words, no emotion, just cold observation. You can't tell if he's processing what happened or enjoying the chaos his presence continues to cause. Then, the prosecution stands and calmly requests a review of courtroom conduct. They call the incident a direct consequence of the emotional manipulation surrounding this case. The implication is clear. This isn't just about justice anymore. It's about control. The Metcalfs sit rigid, eyes red but focused. One of them holds a photo of Austin, gripped tightly but not shown. On the other side, Karmelo's mother has tears in her eyes, but whether they're from pain or pressure, you can't say. You start to ask yourself, what happens when justice turns into a battlefield? Can a fair trial exist when both families feel like they've already lost? And how close are we to seeing something even worse erupt? Because this isn't just a courtroom anymore, it's a powder keg, and the fuse has already been lit. The tension doesn't die down, it mutates. Quiet rage simmers beneath the surface, and you can feel it in the way people breathe, shift in their seats, or clench their fists under folded arms. Security hasn't left the room. They're stationed like statues now, one by each family row, their presence a silent reminder. This trial is no longer under control. Then the prosecution drops something unexpected, a motion to limit family attendance during upcoming testimony. The courtroom gasps, not loudly, but deeply. You feel it in your chest. The motion cites emotional volatility and physical risk of disruption. In short, they're saying the courtroom is too unstable for both families to stay inside together. One of the Metcalfs whispers through gritted teeth, "You want to silence us now?" A Karmelo relative quietly snaps back, "You started this circus." And again, you feel it boil. The judge doesn't answer right away. Instead, he calls for a private sidebar with both legal teams, and the room freezes again. No one's talking, no one's blinking, and behind it all sits Karmelo, unflinching, unmoved, unfazed, like he's not just watching the storm but breathing it in. The families are breaking, the system is strained, and for the first time you start to wonder if the trial is going to make it to the end without something catastrophic happening. You ask yourself, if the families can't even sit in the same room, how will they survive a verdict? What happens if the ruling doesn't go their way? And is the courtroom safer with more security or more separation? Because this isn't just a legal fight anymore, it's emotional warfare. And the front line is forming between 2 grieving families, with nowhere left to run. Then the judge returns to the bench, and everything shifts. His voice is steady, but his message is clear. This trial will continue, but not without boundaries. He grants the motion. Starting tomorrow, Only 2 designated family members from each side may attend in person. The rest must watch from a separate room on a live feed. The room breaks. A Metcalf family member slams their hand on the bench before storming out in tears. A woman on Karmelo's side mutters something under her breath, loud enough for a bailiff to lean in. Even the courtroom reporters look shaken, because this has never happened before in this trial, not like this. You watch as both families sit there, devastated for different reasons, but united in one thing. This no longer feels like justice. It feels like exile, like they've both lost their voices in the very room that was supposed to give them clarity. And while the judge tries to maintain order, it's clear what's really happened. The trial is cracking under the emotional weight. This isn't about evidence anymore, it's about optics, restraint, public safety. And in the middle of it all sits Karmelo, unchanged. No tears, no reaction, just silence that cuts deeper than any outburst ever could. You wonder, what does it mean when a courtroom becomes too dangerous for the truth to be heard in full? When emotion is punished and silence gets to stay seated? And most of all, what happens when this ends? Because when families are divided, emotions spill. But when they're removed altogether, you're left with a courtroom that no longer feels human, just a stage. And the pain, still waiting in the wings. Now the fallout begins, not from the ruling, but from the aftershock of what it took to get there. Outside the courtroom, the scene is chaos. Reporters swarm, protesters shout, and in the center of it all, 2 families being escorted out separate exits like rival camps, because they can't even share a hallway without sparking confrontation. One clip goes viral, a Metcalf supporter, visibly shaking, saying into a mic, "We showed up to speak for our son." They showed up with silence and disrespect. Moments later, a member of Karmelo's circle claps back online. This trial isn't about who cries louder, it's about what's real. And just like that, the fire spreads again. Social media explodes. The hashtags shift from hashtag justice for Austin to hashtag rigged trial and hashtag courtroom chaos. People are no longer arguing over guilt. They're arguing over who's allowed to grieve and how. And while the families are ordered to stand down, the public refuses to. Bloggers call the judge weak. Commentators accuse the system of choosing order over truth. And everywhere you look, it's clear. This case isn't about the stabbing anymore. It's about how much emotion a courtroom will allow before it shuts the doors. Inside, the empty benches speak louder than the testimony. The energy has changed. There's no tension, just cold protocol. And in the middle of it all, Karmelo remains a statue. No flinch, no regret, no empathy. And you start to realize, this trial didn't quiet down. It was silenced. The families weren't calmed, they were cut off. And if no one is allowed to feel in the room where justice is decided, now the silence becomes strategy. With both families partially removed from the courtroom, what should have been a moment for clarity instead feels sterile. Empty benches, cold cross-examinations, a judge too cautious to let emotions back in the room. The courtroom looks like justice on the surface, but it feels hollow. And that hollowness? It's being noticed. One journalist calls it a sanitized trial, where the emotional rawness has been vacuumed out in favor of order and optics. But the truth is, pain doesn't disappear when it's locked in a separate room. It festers. And now you see that festering boil over online. Leaked footage from the overflow room shows Metcalf's father breaking down mid-testimony, forced to watch the trial from a screen, while a stranger testifies about the last minutes of his son's life. In the clip, he whispers, "He doesn't even have to look at me. It's raw, it's real," and it goes viral. Now people are asking the hard questions. Why is the man who lost his son being kept out of the room? Why does the defendant get to sit there, stone-faced, while the victims grieve behind glass? And who exactly is being protected here, the public or Karmelo? Because in trying to contain the emotion, the court may have contained the humanity. You glance around and realize, the courtroom hasn't calmed, it's been scrubbed clean. The pain hasn't passed, it's been pushed out of frame. And what's left feels less like a trial and more like a performance missing its audience. And just like that, a trial meant to bring justice closes another day, not with answers, but with distance. 2 grieving families, separated by walls, a courtroom sanitized of emotion, and a defendant who's barely spoken since the moment this all began. The public can feel it. This isn't resolution, it's erasure. People online aren't talking about evidence anymore. They're talking about how much had to be silenced just to keep the trial going. The anger isn't just about what happened to Austin Metcalf. It's about what's happening now. A grieving family told to keep it down, sit in another room, and watch their son's death be dissected like it's just another case file. Meanwhile, Karmelo Anthony remains motionless, unshaken, almost detached. You start to wonder, has he checked out? Or is this the only place where he feels control? He doesn't have to answer questions. He doesn't have to face the family. He doesn't have to feel. And with every passing day, that silence begins to feel less like strategy and more like defiance. You're left with uncomfortable truths. A family trying to honor their son is treated like a threat. A courtroom meant for justice is now a fortress for control. And a nation that once stood behind a cause is now split between confusion and betrayal. This wasn't supposed to be a spectacle. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But now, the question isn't whether justice will be served. It's whether the people who needed it most will even be allowed in the room to see it. And that, in the end, might be the greatest injustice of all. Not what happened outside the courtroom, but what was silenced inside it.